Hey, it's Pink Buddha, and a question I've been getting asked a lot lately is about the new Push 3. Is this a force killer? Now that's a big question. I don't know if I'll be able to fully answer that in this particular video, but to start that conversation, I sat down with a new friend of mine, Dylan Paris. He's a YouTuber that I just found out randomly lives here in Portland, and he's a Force and Ableton user as well. So we sat down to discuss a lot of different pros and cons, a face-off between these two devices. For my video, I curated some excerpts from this conversation. For his channel, he curated different parts of the conversation. So if this is a topic that interests you, be sure to check out his video as well. There's a link in the description below. Anyways, let's just jump on in. Okay, so yeah, there's going to be a lot of different opinions out there about what is the purpose of these devices. Are they more meant for performance or for production? And in my opinion, the Push is more of a production device, and the Force is more of a performance one. Now, I know that people would say, oh, yes, you can do full production on the Force because of the range and all the other kind of stuff like that. So I totally get it. From my perspective, I don't want to really produce a whole song standalone. I just don't. Plugins are good.
Yeah.
But they're not that great that I want to like mix and master something on there.
Yeah, there's a lot of replacing, right? Like you're almost sketching with the Force or with the MPCs because you have a plugin that you know you might have a better VST of. And so you're going to like, this is the starter version, but that's not super inspiring.
No, and then if you're going to export it, you're going to have to remove all those things anyway. So it's you're caught between like, are you going to do a finished thing on the Force or are you not?
Yeah.
And so that's an aspect that I think of is there. And then also the Push has just always been oriented to be for like fast sketching and production of ideas. And it is golden for that. It really flows between recording a track, you push the button for that track, you're right on it, you record a new thing, you move to the next one. All those aspects work phenomenal on the Push.
And it has that little capture MIDI button, which I really like.
Yeah.
So if you've had an idea and you hit that button, you've recorded it. It's a little finicky, but it's pretty cool. I want to address one other thing you said, which was this being the original version of the Push, and maybe the Push 2 as well, being about production versus performance. There are a few limitations of this device that now make me think they've wholesale shifted to a different priority. When this is in controller mode, I still think it's about production, which makes sense. But the fact that you can't build effects tracks right now on the device, there's so many things you don't have in standalone that you don't need for performance, but you do need for production. Makes me feel like either they just didn't have time or didn't think about it, or they are thinking about this now, especially with we haven't talked about the pads, because where the Push murders the Force is as an instrument. These pads beat anything I've ever used ever.
I haven't felt them yet. But...
Yeah, they're really cool. And once you start using MPE, like I didn't even think I cared about MPE. But then I started actually using it and I was like, oh, this is different. Like I can play string instruments and they're going to sound like string instruments, right? Because you're going to drift in and out of tune per string and you're going to control that. That's not what this thing was even trying to do.
Yeah, that's a good point if you're talking about playing one instrument. We haven't talked yet about how the Force is. It's like a macro powerhouse. And I've talked about that before. If you want to watch the video, it's up here. It has the ability just to do so much from a live setting. The fact that this section of the pads can play an instrument or a drum rack, clips on this upper section up here. And if you want to go further on that, you can push knobs, launch, and note at the same time there. Push them all there.
Yeah.
Then now these are pad macros over here.
No.
Keys, you're playing the pads over here for your track and you're launching clips up here. So if you're in this kind of mode right now, you have the, whatever that thing is called.
AB slider, I think. Crossfader. It's a crossfader. That's it.
Crossfader. You can have the knobs that are set up to control things in the project. You can be launching clips here. You can be playing drum pads over here.
Can be something else, like
and
an
your
XY
screen
pad.
could be an XY pad.
Oh
so
my gosh.
it's like a macro powerhouse.
Yeah.
I mean, you have all these different controls available on one device. You cannot do that on the Push. You cannot divide up this. Hopefully that's something they reconsider. The launch pad has done that. They've come up with the ability to drop in like custom arrangements and things like that on there to be able to use this pad in multiple ways rather than just all 64 pads on one sound or drum rack. I think the only thing that the Force doesn't have that the Push has is this little strip here like this to be able to do modulation and or whatever else you wanted to do. That would have been a really nice element to incorporate in there, which they have done on their other devices.
The MPC keys,
They have it on the keys. They have it on the
that little controller, the studio
one. They have it on there. So that could have been easy to incorporate on there. I mean, they have to make it a little wider, but you know, whatever. It's still beast already. So what's another half an inch or so?
Yeah.
Oh, we should also bring up note repeat, where you can push down a note and have it repeat it at different speeds. And the push has got those right here on the right-hand side.
Yeah.
To get that in the Force, you have to push this R button down and hold the shift button at the same time. It's pretty awkward to be able to get to that page.
For a performance feature.
And then you'd have to leave it on that page in order to be able to easily change between different speeds as you're playing it, which is pretty awkward versus how smooth that is on the push. And when I think of standalone, I think performance.
Yeah. For me, it's interesting because we have almost opposite approaches since all of my live performance stuff is theoretical. I don't actually go out and do live stuff very much. I'm really just...
I like how you said theoretical.
Yeah. No, I'm always thinking like almost all these, I bought this for live performance. Hypothetically, I bought this for live performance. But in day-to-day use, I'm producing.
I mean, one thing you could actually do is use it like a fancy SP404. I didn't even thought about doing that for a while. Like actually literally not have anything on this and just using it as like an effects processor.
Yeah, it's like how EasyBot uses the Octatrack.
It's kind of an expensive effects processor, but you could do it that way where you just had audio coming in and you just used it to like basically like an SP404. Many people do that. They just run straight through the audio. They don't use any of the programming in there. They just use it for the effects and they come out the other side. So you could do that.
Yeah, because you can multi-record arm. And if you had an audio interface too, you could actually, I mean, you probably don't even need an audio interface. You could actually individually affect incoming audio too, which is interesting. But it still would hit some of the walls you're talking about.
For doing what?
Like if you wanted to use it for live audio, you could even have inbound audio coming in and affect it too. Like there is a use case for what you're talking about.
Oh, you could do that on so many of the different tracks because you would be able to, you could decide if you wanted to have them coming, you wanted to monitor them or not monitor them and be able to control that way, especially if in an external interface where you had more channels coming in, you could have a lot that came into this thing that you controlled. So let's talk about the future potential of these devices. And with the Push 3, one of the things that's really incredible is the fact that you have the ability to take out the brain. You can swap the brain out later, right? So that you have the ability to be able to turn this into a long-term device that you buy once and you upgrade over time.
And you can start without a brain.
And you can start without a brain.
Yeah.
I mean, great point on that side of things.
At the core center of it, though, is really that one of these is basically an ARM tablet chip or like an ARM phone chip with minimal RAM, and one of them is a full-scale computer DAW mildly pared down into a box. I think the industrial design of the Push 3 murders everything else on the market except maybe the Machine Plus. And I think that aesthetically, this device can sometimes frustrate me, but it's hard. When I was looking at them on paper and when I was looking at this before I owned it, I was like, this is going to kill the Force. Everything about this is going to be better. I think it's possible. I've said it before. I'll say it again. Don't buy a device based on what you think it will be. But it's really hard not to look at this device and think, a year from now, 2 years from now, this is such an active community. This is such an active user base that it's so hard to imagine someone not either making a Max for Live device designed just for this that solves some of these problems, or Ableton themselves just implementing some of these features.
That's a really good point, because the Max for Live whole thing, right now you can't, there's limited functionality on it, but the Max for Live, the way that opens up Ableton in general is astounding. You can do video through Max for Live stuff. You can do all sorts of weird programming and external device management, not just MIDI to stuff, but like, lights and other weird, I've seen some strange elements where someone had a whole dresser drawer, and when you open the drawers, because of the contact pads on there, was doing stuff in Ableton and like changing stuff. I mean, you can do whatever. So that's a great point, that if this starts to become very functional from a Max for Live standpoint,
I think it will, because that's just power users, right?
You don't even know what this thing could do at that point, because you could maybe have this as a standalone device and run video and audio from it and be able to just do amazing configurations out of it.
Yeah. The potential, if I look at these devices on paper, this is a 4-year-old device. This is brand new. This probably has a 5 to 10 to even longer, to your point, swapping the CPU out lifespan. This is probably nearing the end of its lifespan, although who knows? They could easily keep supporting it. There's nothing fundamentally advanced about the newest MPCs that outdates this. But I do think the user community, although the Force user community rules, shouts out to the Force community, there's just such a huge audience of Ableton users and push users that I could imagine if Ableton doesn't pick up the slack, which I think they will, the users could do it too. And so, yeah, when I look at the futures of these two devices, this one feels like it's going to be the winner. You pay a price for that. I mean, I talked about it in my video. The price difference is pretty big, especially with software. But it's hard not to see this as the future, other than some of the points you've made, which is that there are so many separate play surfaces here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, plus maybe some of these other buttons, versus at most, I think, 2 or 3, depending on what you want to call a split performance here, that it would require someone going in and making a custom thing, but that also feels very possible. I mean, I don't want to get ahead of the game here, and I, again, only buy something based on what it can do today, but people take hardware devices and overwrite the software all the time. That's not something you could do with a push. I mean, I guess you could do it with a push too if you ran a custom script or something.
Yeah, the user template you could do as a controller.
You could hypothetically imagine someone just creating a different like software interface and flashing it to this. Like, I mean, because it is a computer, the room for user customization is hypothetically limitless. It's a Core i3, which means I think it's running Linux, but it is basically a computer. So anything you could do with a Linux computer, assuming it might require cracking, I don't know. I don't do that kind of stuff. Yeah, hypothetically limitless potential, much higher hardware ceiling, 8 gigs of RAM, i3, 256 gig, very fast M.2 SSD, MPE pads. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that makes this feel like the future. And to me, the comparison really comes down to what is it today, and that's where you really see the power of the age of the Force. It's just like it had years to get to where it is, and this has had weeks.
Right. They definitely kind of grew into this device. I mean, here's a question for you.
Yeah.
Do you think a Force 2 is coming out?
Okay, so I had no idea. Usually I feel like I'm aware of rumors, but I totally missed this. But I'm getting a lot of comments now from people who feel very confident, similar to how I felt about 2 years ago when we started seeing Push 3 rumors, that a Force 2 is on the way. Given the cadence of Kai's upgrade cycle, and again, like, I do talk to them, but I know nothing about this, so this is speculation. It makes sense to me. They just did an updated, although limited edition of the MPC XL, and that was about their oldest device. Now this is their oldest
the
device.
MPC 1 that just came out.
Yeah, the MPC 1 Plus as well, and even that was, I think, 2020 when the first MPC 1 came out. MPC Live was 2018 or 19, and then they already did a 2. This guy has just been chilling since 2019.
So basically like the same thing, but just with more RAM?
If the MPC 1 Plus had 4 gigs of RAM, I would have assumed this would be a RAM upgrade. The fact that they didn't do that is super weird to me because the MPC Keys has 4 gigs, the MPC XL has 4 gigs. I know they're trying to keep the price down, and they did a really good job with the MPC 1 Plus, but it's kind of like when Apple's like, we're going to keep supporting the iPhone 7 or whatever, and you're like, okay, well, you just released a device that has this limited of specs. Now you have basically promised your software is going to support 2 gigs of RAM for another X amount of time. It's interesting. If the MPC 1 Plus had come out with 4 gigs, I would have assumed this would have 4. I still think the category of device that the Force is in means it will have 4 gigs. Like, it feels to me like an MPC Live upgrade or the
Sure,
Keys.
it needs that. I mean, at minimum, that's you have. If you keep putting all these software things on it, clearly MPC is like very much focused on the software development side of things.
That's where the money is.
Adding all those extra features to it.
Yeah.
So they're going to need a hardware device that is going to be able to support that.
That is the other big difference. I mean, we've already kind of said this, but like the Machine Plus and the Ableton Push are desktop laptop software forced into a box. The Akai devices are standalone from the ground up, building up, trying to kind of meet in the same middle. And there are pros and cons to that. To your point, the sound quality of most of these plugins, not very good, but they're also really light compared to, like, I load a few heavy MPE devices on here and literally navigating the UI is slow. And you might get crackles. They, similar to the Machine Plus, they don't they don't throttle you. Like, they don't say you can only have 8 tracks. They say, mess around and find out. Like, you might hit a wall, but that's your problem. This is like almost a walled garden in a different way, where like you buy their specific plugins, although this is true for all these devices, but you are limited in software of how many you can use. If they're locking into 2 gigs on the MPC 1 and they still want to sell things like Jura, then like presumably future plugins will have to support 2 gigs of RAM. And it's weird because if you'd asked me 2 years ago, what do you want to see in the next MPCs? I'd be like, beef it up, 8 gigs of RAM, super powerful CPU, built-in SSD. That I always use SD cards because using the internal drives on Akai devices is super finicky. I would have said make a Machine Plus competitor. And now that's what this is, but that's not what I think the next Force will be. Because it seems like, to your point, they're more interested in building an iPad iOS-like ecosystem of hardware that they can sell you and then mildly refresh, and then a software ecosystem, which software does not have manufacturing costs. It does not require shipping. And it is
usually doesn't require samples if
Yeah.
they're like the Jura or the Mini D or something like that.
You don't have to warehouse software. I mean, you store it on servers, but like it's not the same thing as, oh, we made too many Forces. What do? We have to cut the price. With
They did make it nice fact that you can now download those and add them without having to go onto the computer.
Yes.
And make it at your fingertip. But I think anytime you're making a decision about where you want to go with these, you have to really ask yourself, like, what do you want to do on this device?
Yeah. Yep.
That's a little bit hard to answer sometimes because what you think you want to do
Yeah.
turns out to be not how you use it for. I bought an iPad to be able to do video editing and maybe music type stuff from that.
Yeah.
And what I use it mostly for is journaling and watching like Netflix. So I use it for totally different reasons than I intended to. Mm-hmm. But for me, to be able to work in the box and in the computer thing when I wanted to develop sounds, all the access to different plugins and other things like that, and then just quickly drop something in for a performance setting,
Yeah.
that saves so much potential time. Where the Force, it's arduous enough. I did it once and I didn't want to do it again.
Yep. I made a whole video about getting Ableton sessions into the Force, and I basically did it wrong. It's a cumbersome process. But to your point, if the workflow you want involves a computer at any point, like really, especially in the middle, that's your guy. There's like almost no competition.
Okay, so yeah, there's a lot more to discuss here, and this barely scratched the surface. But consider subscribing because I got more videos to come. Comment down below with your thoughts, and I'll see you on the next video.